outside, I'm doing meditation, I'm learning yoga, I'm doing soul retrievals with shamans, I'm doing shamanic trainings on the weekends, like all of this stuff. And then I would go back to work on Monday morning and be like, oh, this is really incongruent. And at the same time, maybe you had this too. I was really like, oh, if my colleagues knew what I was doing out there, oh, they would just think I was over the top woo, like they would totally reject me. And that really gets at, I think, when you talk about the witch wound, that is that the woundedness, whether you identify as a witch or just being a woman and being a spiritual woman and being an intuitive person, those are the wounds that are being called up to be healed right now because we have so much work to do.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Witchy Wellness Radio. This is a show you learn how your body and emotions are not in the way, they're actually leading the way. And today we're talking with Robyn McKay. She is award-winning psychologist, multi-six-figure entrepreneur, and executive coach to top leaders in the Fortune 500 companies in entertainment. Dr. McKay is also a leading expert in the field of spiritual intelligence. She builds bridges between reason and intuition, science and spirit, and her clients' heads and their hearts. In her outside life, out of the office, Robyn loves hiking on the desert trails near her home in Scottsdale, Arizona, and climbing the red rocks of Sedona. Talk about spiritual places to live.
Yes.
Welcome, Robyn, to the show.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Hi, everybody.
I'm so excited to have you on here. I think what you're about is very witchy. And I've found over the years that so many of us listening to Witchy Wellness Radio who are into this kind of spiritual or, holistic health field have our own type of heroine's journey. And we want to give back too and help other people. But it really, like you said, connect your heart with your head. So I think what you have to offer is going to be really, really beneficial to everybody listening today. And we would love to hear, how did you get into, going from psychology background to now doing the work that you do today? What was your own heroine's journey that led you to doing this?
Such a great question. When you talked about witchy wellness, the first thing that came to my mind was when I was in elementary school. I was probably in middle school at this point. I used to sneak into the library. Well, I wouldn't sneak into the library. What I would do is after I got in the library, I would go find all the books on witches and witchcraft. And I would sneak read because I was raised Catholic. And so, there was a whole thing between the Catholics and just esoteric and mysticism. So I've always been somebody who is a clear channel. I've always been intuitive, but I was also a science girl, and I was somebody who, I'm Gen X, so I was raised at a time when all smart girls got mapped into science, technology, engineering, and math. And I didn't really find my home there. Where I did find my home is in psychology. I got my PhD in counseling psychology, and that's where I really started studying creativity, spiritual intelligence, just plain intelligence, just processing speed as well. And one of my professors said one time to me, as I was describing all of this research I was doing, she said, well, research is me search. And she was right. So I ended up getting a PhD in counseling psychology, but everything that I studied was really to deepen my understanding of who I am and what I'm here to do. And then to go on to help people who are like me, who are spiritually intelligent, intuitive, who have been connected with divine source from the time we were incarnated here, even if it doesn't make sense in the cultural and societal norms that have been set up for us to kind of swim around in at this point. So that's kind of the beginning of my heroine's journey for sure.
And that's so many of our own stories, the me search. I had to laugh. Like that is so
Isn't that so good? I just want to understand myself. And that's why we want to take quizzes and we want to take assessments. And we have this deep hunger of wanting to understand who we are. In fact, I would say that there's a desire to understand who you are or who I am. But at the core, we already know. We just want some evidence for our intellect that this is actually who we are. I know this is who I am, but when I see the data sitting in front of me that shows that, oh no, this proves who I am, there's something very satisfying in that. Unfortunately, I think we can get that tangled up with having to prove ourselves over and over and over again to people who really don't understand or have an interest in really deeply understanding who we are as light workers, as spiritual warriors, and so on at this time in the world.
I know you work with a lot of the spiritual entrepreneurs or light workers,
Mm-hmm.
which I know so many of us identify with. And
The
you,
starseeds are another group
Starseed,
who are coming
yes.
forward as well, especially for the millennials and Gen Z. So there's all of these beings here on this planet right now who are really looking at the 3D
Yeah.
matrix that we've been living in and not really relating to it, but trying to figure out who we are um, in the context of this world we're living in. And that's always a struggle.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I know just kind of for me, learning about what all those words meant, like a
Mm-hmm.
decade ago, I'm a millennial in my early 20s. I was like, there's got to be more than life than this, right? Like I
Yes.
was in corporate America. I spent my whole life preparing to go to the school, get the job, and then I was
Mm-hmm.
there. And it was just like this existential crisis, which I didn't realize
Yes.
that's what it was at the time. And so many of us are going through that right
Yes.
now.
I love that you're bringing up existential crisis. That's my favorite thing to talk about. My body's covered in chills right now
Yay!
because I know nobody wants to talk about existential crises, but that's one of my
Let's go.
favorite things to, yeah, let's go. But to your point, and I'm glad you brought up the corporate piece because I started in corporate as well. That's part of my story. And that's one of the reasons that I work with spiritual entrepreneurs because so many of us are being called back into the corporate space. In fact, I have a training program that I do, and the tagline is if you think you're too woo for corporate, let me change your mind. So isn't that great? Like that just because I remember so early in my career, I worked in a biosafety level 3 lab. I was hands on in the lab. I was working with really dangerous microorganisms, quite frankly, and burned out as a result of, in part of that. And also that I was driving 45 minutes one way to work in heavy traffic every day. And I just remember probably the same thing that happened or something similar happened with you is just feeling like, is this all there is? Because if this is it, this sucks. And at the time I was 28, I had found a picture of my high school graduation day. And you remember that day that you graduate from high school and like the whole world feels like it's ahead of you. And I looked at that picture of myself and my eyes were bright and I could see the whole universe in my eyes that day. Flash forward 10 years, I'm now burned out in existential crisis and I don't realize it. And I look at that picture of myself and I say, where are you? Because you're not here. And this life I'm living is not the life that you'd envision. So what's the deal? And that really began my own journey, that inward journey, that heroine's journey into figuring out who I am and what I'm meant to be doing in this world. And subsequently, obviously, doing all the work to help other people make that own journey into themselves.
Yeah, and that our own heroine's journey
Yeah.
is what's guiding us to that higher self. That is our higher being calling us to do our light work. You
You
know,
know, Joseph Campbell is famous for, of course,
yeah.
the hero's journey. And there's a story of, I forget who the author is on this one, Carol, you might know. She actually wrote a book on the heroine's journey. She was one of Joseph Campbell's students. And she went to him in class one day and she said, well, you're talking about men, the hero's journey. She said, what about women? What about our journey? You know what he said to her? This is what is supposedly, I don't know, we weren't there, but this is the mythology. He said to her, women don't have hero's journeys. And she was like, what? Well, that's
Excuse
not
me.
true. So she went on to write an entire kind of thesis around what the heroine's journey actually is. And then one of my I'll call her an adjacent mentor in counseling psychology, actually wrote a book around the heroine's journey. And what she said, which I think is really interesting, is her name's Kate Noble. She said that women's journey is an inward journey. The journey inside to find ourselves, we encounter dragons along the way. So we have to do all of our healing work. We encounter allies and mentors. And in the end, we come home to ourselves. And then we can go have the external journeys and go, swim with the dolphins and slay dragons or whatever we want to do. But there's so much of, I identify, I think, with both the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. Probably you do too, because so many of us are more balanced in terms of masculine and feminine. And yet I think that there's so much value in looking at specifically the heroine's journey as you're going through that existential questioning about who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing here.
100%, because, we talk a lot about the witch wounds here, as a
Mm-hmm.
woman. And I think that the way you just beautifully explained the heroine's journey, that's really enabling us to take a look at those, and not from a place of victimhood at all, but from this empowering perspective, so that we can go inward and really heal both the masculine and the feminine. And the witch, obviously this is witchy wellness, but the past few podcasts we've had has come up just naturally. And I know in my own personal life, having multiple heroine's journeys and continuing, it's an ever-going process that has really been coming up right now for me. And I think just the collective psyche as a whole is really, how do we balance this and heal this? Because there's so much fear, there's so much rage and resentment and anger, right, that we need to really to work through.
Think about it. When you're in corporate, like you were, or like I was, or like many of your listeners probably were or continue to be as well, and you're on this spiritual journey, and there's not a congruence between like how you're presenting yourself outside, and that's self-protective, to be honest. I worked in tech, in biotech, for a long time. So can you imagine little Robyn before she had her PhD as this little cute little, girl in corporate, science girl, writing clinical study reports and package inserts and protocols and things like that. And outside, I'm doing meditation, I'm learning yoga, I'm doing soul retrievals with shamans, I'm doing shamanic trainings on the weekends, like all of this stuff. And then I would go back to work on Monday morning and be like, oh, this is really incongruent. And at the same time, maybe you had this too, I was really like, oh, if my colleagues knew what I was doing out there, oh, they would just think I was over the top woo, like they would totally reject me. And that really gets at, I think, when you talk about the witch wound, that is that the woundedness, whether you identify as a witch or just being a woman and being a spiritual woman and being an intuitive person, those are the wounds that are being called up to be healed right now, because we have so much work to do. We work on ourselves, but I mean like work on the planet to to recalibrate to these higher frequencies that are coming in, and to make the transition and the ascension to the new earth energies that are here. So, and to really extract ourselves from the 3D matrix that's continuing to create some enslavements and servitude for most of us.
So let's talk about that. What you just said,
let's do it.
Moving into the new earth, because I totally resonate with that. And how does working with corporate America, how can we tie those two together? And I mean, that's what you help people do.
Yeah.
How can
such a great question. I've got clients who are working in tech at some of the biggest tech companies in the world. Like if I name them, you would know them. And in fact, I just got an email from somebody right now that just popped across my screen that's scheduling she's an old client. She's coming back in. She's like, I need some more support. So these are engineers, these are scientists, these are physicians, these are highly educated people who are struggling with how things are right now. Think about in corporate right now, there's so many layoffs going on, especially in the tech sector. And that's the conversation I've been having lately about how are we coping with this, whether you get laid off or you're one of the, I'm using air quotes here, survivors of a layoff or a reduction in force. It has a ripple effect on our souls that largely goes unacknowledged in the corporate space. But when people like you and I, who have been in the corporate space, we've been boots on the ground, we know what it's like. You can remember probably in your space, somebody getting laid off or something, you know what I mean? Like there's all of those, and those are corporate, but that's actually what I call corporate trauma. But once you clear that, once you're on the other side of it, you can actually go back in and lend a hand, lend your light, lend your presence to the people who are still there, who are really hungry for the things that they're seeing in your life, in your light, that exist in themselves too, but they're still, I'm going to use the word trapped, and I don't mean that necessarily in a victim perspective, but they're still kind of anchored in to that old matrix. Now, there are lots of light workers in corporate. A lot of them are in the closet, to be honest. And they're doing what I used to do, maybe what you used to do as well, is behind the scenes on the weekends, reading my tarot cards on the side to see if I'm going to get a raise or a promotion or something like that. Oh, can I tell you a story that just occurred to me?
Of course. That's why you're here.
I'm just riffing. I'm just like channeling whatever's coming through. I pay attention to what my guides. And so here's the deal. So I was working in biotech. I had decided to go back to get my PhD. And I only applied to one PhD program. I knew that, and the way that I figured this out is I was at a shamanic training workshop over a weekend, and I did a shamanic journey on what my next step was. Right. So what came through was the essence of it was that the University of Kansas was my place. And it was going to be a place within the university that I hadn't originally thought of. Well, sure enough, I found this counseling psychology program. I applied for it. I got all my interviews in. I got all the application in and had done all the interviews, and I'm waiting to hear. And that waiting part is so hard. Did I get in or not? And in my mind, I was like, okay, well, if I don't get in, I guess I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I mean, my life was okay. But there was in my spirit, I'm like, no, I'm getting in. I'm getting in. My dad had given me a bag of rune stones. Are you familiar with rune stones? They're like ancient. I think they're Nordic actually in origin. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he had given me a bag of these rune stones, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to pull a rune stone and see if I got in. Like that was going to be my confirmation that I got in. So I'm sitting there, and I really I wasn't like being lackadaisical about it. I was very intentional about this. Like, I really want to know. So I pull the stone and I look at the interpretation. It's the stone acceptance. And I was like, holy shit, acceptance. But do you want to know what my intellect did? My spirit was like, yes, I'm in. My intellect is like, well, does that mean you got accepted to the program? Or does that mean that you have to accept that you didn't get into the program? Well, so I just wanted to share that, because even during those early days, as I was making my transition out of corporate and into the space of spiritual intelligence, of transformational coaching, and so on, I was still using those tools, and I was quite adept at them. In fact, I think a lot of the reason that my PhD was not easy by any means, but it was more smooth for me than it was for other people, because I was using energy work and I was doing all of the magic, really, that was, I'm going to say, ancient tools and technologies that I had access to, and I was using those in real world conditions. And I think that's the greatest gift that we can give our clients and our friends and our colleagues who are still in corporate, is to teach them these tools. They can use those in corporate. You can learn how to read a room if you're sitting in the corporate boardroom or in a meeting on Zoom. You can read and see who's engaged and who's not, and see who needs to be paying attention more, or who has a contribution to make, but they're too afraid or too nervous to share. Like, there are all kinds of things that we can do with these spiritual tools and technologies in the corporate space. And part of my work is really to give people the training and then the permission to do so, because that's how we actually transform that space, is by bringing in our own light and our own abilities to create transformation.
I resonate so much of what you just said. And I'm thinking,
what was coming through for you?
Well, at first, when you're talking about the corporate trauma, we talked about that a while ago, like being a quote unquote survivor and feeling this overland masculine trauma of, okay, well, our team just got tighter. We don't have more people coming in. It's all on me. It's, it's all on our team. And it was just to the point where it was just like more work, less people, more work, less people. And this never ending thing. Yes.
They will push you because you're agreeable and you're a nice person and you want to do good work. So they'll just keep on piling things on. What space were you in?
I was in marketing. So I was in the fashion retail industry for a decade. So it was definitely more creative space. Like, we ended up, they had Headspace app for people available for free. Like, they were, they're definitely promoting more that corporate wellness atmosphere, which is awesome. So great to see. And obviously the the industry overall, younger, way millennials,
Mhm.
and even, Gen Z coming in, like, I think just the mindset I could see over the decade that I was there, how the culture completely shifted and it continues to, just based on the employees. So that was really
Yeah.
great for to me to see as a company culture as a whole. But especially in like the tech industry, my dad's in the tech industry, and he just said even just women in the tech
Mhm.
industry, how different that is and
Yeah.
how much their company supports. He's in a really big tech company, anything that women want to do. And he's been trying to get, and this, of course, everybody I have on the show, he's been trying to convince me to go into more corporate coaching as well. And I'm like, of course, Dad. Of
Well, listen, you need to
course.
listen to my first training. It's free. It's what do you need to get started
Yeah.
in the corporate space as somebody who's a spiritually intelligent leader? I mean, you the gift that we have is that we can speak both languages,
Hmm.
and we give permission to other people to speak the language of spirit. But first we have to they have to know that we speak their language. One of the things that I hear from my clients over and over again is, Robyn, I'm so glad that you have real corporate experience because you get it. The know, like, and trust factor is super important, especially in the transformational space. Transformation, as you know, it's not a pretty painless process. It's a deep dive into the depths of your soul. And sometimes you see things that you don't like. And sometimes it's so hard. And to what people are asking for are people like you and me who can hold the space for them, literally hold the space for them energetically, for them to be able to have a soft spot to land in order to do this deeper work. But when the front facing facade is, I have to be strong, I can't be perceived as weak. And even in this changing culture where, yes, there is a whole lot being done for mental health and well-being, for neurodiversity, which is another big interest of mine. I have ADHD and went through all of my tech life undiagnosed. Um, all of these ways that they're, at least on the surface, promoting what we're talking about are actually points of entry for us to be able to come in and pull people deeper into, or invite them deeper into, the transformational world. So
Yeah.
I agree with your dad. I think you need to get back into corporate.
Yeah, I know you were telling that story about the runes, and I was like, of course, because it's all,
Mhm.
listening to my dad. Every time I have a podcast guest on, it's always what I need to hear. And I've told
Yeah,
people this every single episode. It's like, I don't need to post this out. I love everybody else being able to hear it, but it's
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 for
just like,
you.
of course, it's for me.
Yeah.
It's for me.
Well, it's an invitation,
Yeah.
right, for all of us to go deeper into the work that we're meant to be doing.
Hmm.
And I just know that for somebody like you who is, has a reputation in your field already, and then being able to go back in and say, hey, I would be willing to bet for you, Lauren, that you would have 5 to 10 people who you could reach out to today and say, hey, I'm doing some burnout recovery training. Are you interested? I bet you would have all kinds of hands raised around you.
Yeah.
It would be pretty simple because of the connections that you already have.
So
And
what if people, I'm thinking as my perspective, and also because when we start doing our light work or getting into what we're passionate about, the marketing ploy in the entrepreneur world is like, get out, ditch the 9 to 5, get out of it, like run away. What what are some things you have to say to the people who might still kind of have that icky resistance, right? That maybe feel like, am I ready to go back into this world,
back into corporate after
Yeah, and
leaving.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's a really great question because we do have some corporate trauma to deal with. And I was going to say, unless and until you really deal with the corporate trauma, if you've got any nigglies around that, you want to address that before you move back into the space. The last thing that you want is to have to process your own trauma while you're trying to support other people. That's just silly. And, it's bad for business too. So we want to take care of that. It doesn't mean that you have to be, nobody is fully self actualized. Not me, Even though on Instagram, yes, I'm the queen of self-actualization. I can be, because I've been doing this for 20 years, moving in the direction of self-actualization, right? So that's a self-proclaimed title. I say that tongue in cheek, but nobody's self-actualized. But we do have to have the support and the people around us who are going to be able to see through whatever's going on with us. For example, in the last week, I was hiking in Sedona and I hit my head on a tree branch and knocked myself silly. And by the way, I'm a really good hiker, guys. I'm like a mountain goat. So it's very unusual. I never get hurt when I'm hiking, and I smacked my head. So that was accident number one. Then I was back home in Scottsdale, hiking up on the trail near our house with our dog Cooper. And I caught a rock with my toe and went flying down the trail like Superman. I have still abrasions on my chin from it, and I landed on my wrist. I'm fine though. It's really weird. Like my body heals very quickly. So then the third thing, I'm doing an equine assisted leadership retreat coming up in Feb. I was over at the place where I'm doing the retreat. I was in the arena with the horses, and somebody spooked, and one of the horses stepped on my foot. Right? So you can do all of your translations about what does that mean? Like, I know I'm sharing this for a reason. So I'm not processing that with you. I'm sharing that happened. I've got my own people who I process that with. And what's going on behind the scenes for me? Well, I'm doing some quantum leaps in my business. I've got some rear view mirror trauma that has kind of popped up again that we're dealing with, and we cleared. And and just so those things happen all the time. So that's why I say, like, on the journey to self-actualization, I'm not fully self-actualized, obviously, but I have my resources in place so that I can say, what do you think's going on here? And what's the best approach to clearing this as fast as possible? And we do that. That just makes good business sense. Then I can go back out into the world and say, okay, let's go. Chop, chop. What's next? Who's next? Does that make sense?
It makes total sense too. And on the kind of the other side of that stick, I know for me and a lot of women who already are entrepreneurs or wanting to get, helping other people in their own business, when those things do come up, it's this little bit of a freak out of maybe the underlying, self-worth issues. Am I really ready to do this? Can it, who am I if I can't keep it together 100% of the time? That perfectionist comes up too.
That's the imposter syndrome that rears its ugly head in all of us. I did a podcast on that about a year ago, and the title of the podcast is Stop Telling Women We Have Imposter Syndrome. It's based on some research that came out in Harvard Business Review, where the authors really identified that if you feel like an imposter, it's because the systems and structures are set up to make you feel like an imposter. It's not you, it's the system. And I think that that's a really good way of looking at it. Can we stop making ourselves a project all the time and start looking at, like, what are the systems and structures that are creating the conditions for me to feel this way? And yet, I will also say that there's the inner journey of really truly owning who you are and being able to stand in that without asking for permission or waiting for somebody to approve of what you're doing or to give you the gold star of A+ in order to go out and do your work in the world. So if there's hesitancy, to go back to your question about, am I ready to go back into corporate? If there's hesitancy, you do need to look at worthiness. You do need to look at deservedness. You need to look at trauma. You need to look at imposter syndrome. And there comes a point where you're healed enough that you can move back into it. And that starts with a decision. I feel called to corporate. And so if I am called to corporate, I'm going to believe myself. I'm going to believe the calling. And I'm going to find the right people to surround me with. I'm going to get the best advice I can. And I'm going to dive in enthusiastically like I do everything else in my life. Because there are people in that space who are calling to me right now, who are asking for that very elixir of life that I have discovered through my own heroine's journey. And I have it, and now I can share it with them. through my stories, through my experience, through my wisdom, and help them create transformation in their own life. Is that not a worthy quest?
Mic drop. I mean, yes.
You're welcome. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that was really good. Did we get
Yeah.
that? Did we?
Yeah, it's recording. We got it, everybody. We got it on film. Yes.
Yeah. So that's when we put the mission or the quest ahead of the yabbits and ahead of the, oh, I don't know if I'm ready. It's like, come on, guys. Like, it is so time to get off the bench and get back in the game, for God's sake. Can we please? If not now, when?
Exactly. And I love this discussion. It's really calling us up into what we're here to do.
It's an invitation into the ascension process. And, the ascension process is a shift in frequency. It's a shift in perspective. We all talk about it. That's sort of it's become kind of a catchphrase at this point, and nobody really knows what that means. But when I really dial into what my guides are saying about ascension, it's, shifting frequency and perspective and seeing ourselves as whole and human. I was on a mastermind call with one of my mastermind partners, Elise. You should have her on. Elise breathes. She's awesome. She does. Yeah, you have to have her on.
Amazing.
I'll introduce
Love
you.
it. Thank you.
I was on a mastermind with her earlier today, and she was doing, we do, so this is peer-to-peer, right? So we were doing just an exchange of, perspectives, and we both work in the Akashic Records. So she was doing a meditation and healing session for me. And I kept on seeing all the superheroes from the Marvel comics as part of it. And I got off after we finished. I was telling her, I said, I just keep seeing us as, how Thor just is Thor. He's in the human world, but he's Thor. And so, like, he doesn't apologize for being Thor. He just is. I'm like, can we just own that for ourselves? Is that's our nature, is to be it's not to be, it is supernatural. And if we can walk around as the supernatural beings that we are, just by being ourselves without apology, how transformational is that?
Once again, mic freaking drop moment.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the whole message of this, if that's the only thing anybody got out of this episode, be the Thor of your, I don't want to say be the Thor of your life, be you. Be you.
That version, the highest, most embodied, most clairvoyant, claircognizant, spiritually intelligent, infinite being who you are. Mm-hmm. And just walk around in that. And then if you decide to step into corporate, you step in that space. Yeah. Not in the, for me, the little science girl with the white lab coat and safety goggles version of myself. Yeah. But as the goddess that I am, as the goddess that you are, that's transformative. Ooh.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful way to close the show out, to be honest. Was there anything else you feel called, your guides coming through, or you intuitively, that you want to say before we start to close the show out today?
Well, I just think that frequency is so important. Managing your frequency by drinking really good water, managing your frequency by using really quality electrolytes, and taking care of your nervous system. These are the things that are going to be very supportive of that supernatural, eternal energy coming through you. Our bodies are our partners. They have their own consciousness, and they are requiring some fortification, and they are requiring some different nutrients coming through. So you have to take care of your body in order to be able to really channel these higher frequencies. Otherwise, you blow your circuits out, and we don't want that either. Yeah, I think that's it.
I think that's the newer perspective on ascension. Before, I think it was like, let's ascend outside of our bodies. Now I think we're all really realizing that this is the vessel that is our body is coming with us, y'all. Like, we, be able to take care of it. And so beautifully said.
I had that conversation with my body the other day. I'm like, okay, body, I don't want to be out of my body anymore like I was on the trail. when I tripped and fell. I know I was like daydreaming about some other like magical world that maybe exists. I was like, body, can you take me there? My body got so happy.
Oh,
My face just started smiling. And it was like that part of me that's in the physical was like, yeah, thanks for finally asking,
yeah.
sweetheart. Like, yes, of course, let's go. So there is that partnership between our spirits and our bodies that we have a responsibility to cultivate and to ascend, to your point, together.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Robyn, for coming on today. It was such a pleasure. Was there, I guess we close the show the same way every week. How may we, the as the listeners, as an act of gratitude, be of service for you and return today?
Thank you so much for asking me
Yeah.
that. I'm always practicing my receiving muscles. So, what I would love is if you would connect with me on Instagram and send me a message and just say what you took out of this show. And if it really feels good to you, share it with your networks as well so that we can get this message out.
Thank you again so much. And just like Robyn said, if you guys haven't already, hit subscribe. We are on all podcast platforms as well as YouTube as well. And if you feel called, please share and write a review. This really helps ripple out the real algorithm, but also the real energy and the light work into this world. Thank you again, Robyn, so much for coming on the show. It was such an honor to have you on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.